When a quiet farmer's land cracks open after an earthquake, what he finds hidden beneath the soil shakes a small town and uncovers a centuries-old secret no one could have imagined. The earthquake came in the middle of the night. It was not the kind of violent shaking people saw in the news from big cities. But it was strong enough to wake everyone in the little farming town. Samuel, who had lived his whole life on the same piece of land, sat up in bed when the wooden beams of his farmhouse rattled. His old dog barked in panic and the dishes clattered in the kitchen. For a few seconds, Samuel thought the whole place might come down, but then, just as suddenly as it started, the shaking stopped. Silence filled the night again, except for the echo of barking dogs in the distance. Samuel had never felt an earthquake this strong before. The town was built on flat farmland, surrounded by hills and forests, and life there was usually quiet and slow. Earthquakes were things people read about in newspapers, not something they expected to live through. But this night was different, and Samuel couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his chest. He stayed awake for hours, listening for aftershocks, but eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, the sun rose bright and warm, as if nothing unusual had happened. Birds sang in the trees, and the fields of crops waved gently in the breeze. Samuel put on his boots, grabbed his hat, and stepped outside to check on his land. He wanted to be sure the fences were still standing and the barn hadn't been damaged. The animals were restless, and the horses snorted nervously when he entered the barn. They could still sense the disturbance from the night before. As he walked across the field, Samuel noticed the soil looked different in some places. Lines and cracks ran across the ground, cutting through the crops like scars. At first he thought it was just surface damage, but one crack caught his attention. It wasn't just a shallow line. It was wide, dark, and deep, running down into the earth like a gaping wound. Samuel stood at the edge and peered inside. He expected to see nothing but broken soil and rocks, but what he saw made his heart skip. The sides of the opening were not jagged like natural breaks in the earth. They looked smooth, almost carved, as if someone had shaped them long ago. Curiosity pulled him closer. He crouched down and touched the edge of the crack. The dirt crumbled beneath his fingers, but underneath there seemed to be stone. He leaned farther and saw that the crack led to what appeared to be a tunnel. A cold draft of air came up from below, carrying with it the smell of dampness and something ancient. Samuel straightened up quickly, his mind racing. Why would there be a tunnel beneath his land? His family had farmed here for generations, and no one had ever mentioned such a thing. He wondered if it could be some kind of old drainage system, or maybe an abandoned mine. But the walls didn't look like any mine he had ever seen. They seemed too deliberate, too carefully shaped. He thought about ignoring it, covering it up, and moving on with his day. But the image of that dark hole lingered in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about what might be down there. The tunnel meant there had been people here long before him, doing something secret beneath the very ground he worked every day. He decided he had to get a better look. He fetched a flashlight from his barn, tied a length of rope around his waist, and secured the other end to a sturdy fence post. His heart pounded as he lowered himself into the opening. The air grew cooler as he descended, and the light from above faded quickly. When his boots touched solid ground, he turned on the flashlight and froze. The beam lit up a narrow passage stretching into the darkness. The walls were stone, not soil, and they bore the marks of chisels or tools. Samuel slowly moved forward, his footsteps echoing softly. The deeper he went, the more convinced he became that this was no natural cave. Someone had built this, and they had built it to last. He walked only a short distance before stopping. The tunnel seemed to go on endlessly, and he wasn't ready to test how far it led. He looked around carefully and noticed something strange on the wall's shapes scratched into the stone. Too worn to make out clearly, but definitely not natural. They looked like symbols or markings faded with time. A chill ran down his spine. He imagined people long ago standing in the same place, carving those marks into the stone. What were they doing here? Why had they dug this tunnel beneath what was now farmland? Samuel shined his light on the ground and saw fragments of something, broken pieces of pottery scattered near the wall. He bent down and picked up one shard. Brushing the dirt away, it felt old, fragile and handmade. The discovery both excited and frightened him. He carefully put the shard back where he found it and made his way to the rope. Climbing out, he felt the warmth of the sun again, but the image of the tunnel stayed with him. He stood there for a long time, staring at the crack in the ground, wondering if he should tell anyone. Later that day, Samuel mentioned it to a couple of his neighbors. They laughed and told him he was probably just looking at a broken ditch, or a crack widened by the quake. They said he should fill it in before one of his cows fell inside. But Samuel knew what he had seen. The smooth walls, the markings, the pottery, these were not the results of a simple earthquake. That night, as he sat on his porch, the memory of the cool air and dark passage wouldn't leave his mind. He felt torn between fear and curiosity. He was just a farmer, not an explorer or a historian. But fate had put this tunnel in front of him, and he couldn't ignore it. He felt as if the earth itself had revealed a secret to him during the quake, and he was now responsible for uncovering the truth. The stars glimmered above, and the farm around him lay quiet. Yet beneath his feet, hidden in the darkness, was a tunnel built by hands from a time he did not understand. He wondered if he had stumbled upon something dangerous, or if it was simply forgotten history waiting to be rediscovered. Whatever it was, Samuel knew this was only the beginning of something much larger than himself. Samuel could not sleep much after his first step inside the tunnel. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the smooth walls, the carvings, and the broken pottery. He tried to tell himself it was just an old drainage passage, something harmless. But his mind refused to believe it. Something about the tunnel felt different, almost alive, as if the earth was hiding a story beneath his land. By the next morning, curiosity had become stronger than fear. He knew he had to go back. He woke. Before sunrise, packed a small bag with a flashlight, an extra set of batteries, a piece of chalk to mark his way, and some rope. He also filled a bottle with water and put a piece of bread in his pocket. His old dog followed him to the edge of the field, wagging its tail, but when they reached the crack in the ground, the animal stopped. It whined softly, refusing to get closer. Samuel frowned. Animals had instincts humans didn't always understand. He gave the dog a gentle pat and told it to stay behind. Standing at the edge of the tunnel entrance, Samuel hesitated for a moment. The hole looked darker than it had yesterday. It was as if the sun could not chase away the shadows that lived inside. He tightened the rope around his waist, tied it again to the fence post, and climbed down slowly. When his boots touched the ground, the cool, damp air wrapped around him like a blanket. He switched on his flashlight, and the narrow passage lit up in a pale glow. This time, Samuel was determined to go farther. He took a piece of chalk and made a white mark on the wall near the rope, so he could always find his way back. His heart was pounding, but step by step, he moved deeper into the tunnel. The sound of his own breathing echoed softly around him. The deeper he went, the more he felt he was walking into another world. The walls were rough, but shaped in a way that showed human effort. In some places, he saw wooden beams supporting the ceiling, though most had rotted and collapsed. The carvings on the walls became clearer as he moved forward. Some looked like simple shapes, but others appeared to be symbols or letters. He ran his fingers across one and felt the grooves under his skin. They were old, but they still told him that someone had been here with a purpose. A few steps later, his flashlight caught something lying on the ground. It was a broken clay pot, larger than the shard he had seen before. He bent down, lifted it gently, and examined it. The design was strange, with faint patterns etched into the surface. It looked handmade, not something modern. He set it back, down carefully, and pressed forward. As the tunnel curved, Samuel noticed the air growing colder. The silence around him was heavy, broken only by the sound of dripping water somewhere ahead. He stopped, listening. It was not just the sound of water. There was a faint hum, almost like the earth itself was breathing. He shook his head, telling himself it was just his imagination, but the uneasiness in his chest grew stronger. After what felt like half an hour of walking, Samuel discovered something that made him freeze. To his left, The tunnel widened into a small chamber. He shined his light inside and gasped. There were piles of objects stacked against the wall's pieces. Of wood, fragments of cloth, and tools that looked like they had been abandoned centuries ago. Rusted blades lay among the debris, their shapes almost eaten away by time. A wooden box sat in one corner, half buried in dirt. Samuel's hands trembled as he brushed the dirt away and opened the lid.
Oh.
Inside were smaller objects, metal coins, their surfaces worn but still bearing faint images. He held one up close to the flashlight and saw the faint outline of a face carved into the metal, along with strange writing he did not recognize. His heart raced. These were not ordinary objects. These were relics of people who had lived long before him. He sat on the ground for a moment, staring at the box of coins. Questions swirled in his head. Who had left these here? Why had they built this tunnel? And why had it remained hidden for so long? He thought about his neighbors who laughed at him, saying it was just a crack in the earth. If only they could see what he was seeing now. Still holding the coin, Samuel suddenly felt the air shift. A draft brushed past his face, coming from deeper in the tunnel. He turned his flashlight toward the darkness and saw the passage continuing. Farther, leading into more shadows. His fear returned, but so did his determination. He couldn't stop now. He put the coin back in the box, closed the lid, and marked the chamber wall with chalk before moving forward again. The tunnel grew narrower, forcing him to duck his head. The air smelled different, here damp and earthy, but also metallic, like rust or old blood. His footsteps echoed more sharply in this section, as if the walls were closing in on him. He tried not to think about what might happen if the ceiling collapsed. Then, just as he thought about turning back, he stumbled on something. Half buried in the dirt, he bent down and brushed it off with his hand. It was a tool, an old hammer made of metal, its handle splintered, but still intact. The design was unusual, not like the farm tools he was used to. It looked like something meant for building, or perhaps even for breaking stone. Samuel held it in his hand and felt the weight of it. It was as if the tunnel itself had been waiting to hand him a clue. The farther he went, the more he felt as though he was walking through layers of time. Every step carried him deeper into history. He imagined the people who had dug these walls, the sweat on their brows, the sound of their tools striking stone. Were they hiding something? Were they protecting themselves from danger? The tunnel sloped downward, and soon Samuel found himself standing in ankle-deep water. The flashlight beam rippled across the surface, reflecting strange shapes on the walls. He felt a shiver run down his spine. Ahead, the tunnel branched into two directions. He hesitated, staring at both paths. The left side looked narrow and uneven, while the right side seemed smoother, almost inviting. Samuel made a mark on the wall with chalk and chose the right path. The air grew colder with every step, and the silence became so deep that he could hear his own heartbeat. Suddenly, his flashlight beam caught something that made him stop in his tracks. There, on the wall, was a carving, unlike the others he had seen. This one was larger and clearer, symbols shaped like a circle with lines running through it. He stood there staring at it, feeling both awe and fear. The symbol looked deliberate, almost like a warning or a message. He didn't understand what it meant, but he knew it was important. He touched the carving, and the stone felt strangely smooth and cold beneath his hand. Samuel's instincts told him he had seen enough for one day. His bag was nearly empty of supplies, and his flashlight was starting to dim. Reluctantly, he turned back, retracing his steps with the help of the chalk marks. His heart pounded harder as he walked, afraid of losing his way, but soon he saw the rope hanging from the crack above. He climbed out into the sunlight, breathing deeply as the warm air hit his face. When he reached the surface, his dog ran to him, barking happily, but Samuel could hardly smile. He sat down on the grass, staring at the open crack. He now knew for certain that this was no ordinary hole. This was a man-made tunnel filled with secrets, and the more he saw, the more questions burned inside him. The earthquake had not just shaken his farm. It had shaken open a doorway to the past, and Samuel could not ignore it anymore. Something was hidden beneath his land, something far older and more mysterious than anyone in town could imagine. Deep inside, Samuel knew he had only scratched the surface of what waited for him below. Samuel spent the next few days restless, his thoughts trapped inside the tunnel even when his body was working the farm. He tried to plow his fields, feed his animals, and carry on as normal, but every sound of the shovel striking soil reminded him of the hammer he had found buried in the dirt underground. Every time he carried water to his horses, he remembered the shallow pool at the bottom of the tunnel where his boots had splashed. He felt as if the earth beneath him was whispering, begging him to return and uncover more. Finally, on the fourth morning after the quake, he gave in to the call. This time, he prepared better. He brought 2 lanterns, more chalk for markings, food, and even an old notebook to sketch what he found. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. His neighbors already thought he was chasing shadows, and he wanted to keep this discovery safe from curious eyes. When he climbed back down the rope into the tunnel, the air greeted him like a cold breath. The silence was heavy, but he no longer felt like a stranger there. This time, he walked with purpose. He passed the broken pots, the box of coins, and the carved walls, until he reached the place where the tunnel had split into 2. He had already explored the right path and seen the strange symbol on the wall. His eyes turned toward the narrow, uneven left side. He hesitated for a moment. The left path looked rough and unstable, the kind of place where a single wrong step might bring rocks crashing down. But Samuel's curiosity won over his fear. He took a deep breath, made a chalk mark on the wall, and stepped inside. The tunnel. Here was tighter. He had to duck his head and squeeze through in places. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the stones scraped against his shoulders. But after several minutes, the passage widened again, and to his surprise, he found himself standing in another chamber. This one was larger than the first chamber he had discovered. His lantern's light flickered across the walls, and Samuel's mouth went dry. Carvings covered nearly every surface, lines, shapes, and symbols, far more detailed than the ones he had seen before. Some looked like maps, while others resembled figures of people holding objects or standing in groups. The sight made his chest tighten. He couldn't understand the meaning, but he knew these carvings were not random. They were telling a story, one that had been left hidden for generations. In the corner of the chamber lay more objects, half buried under dirt and stone. Samuel knelt and brushed them off carefully. He uncovered fragments of cloth so old they crumbled at his touch, pieces of wood shaped into handles, and a rusted blade that might have once been a sword or a large knife. The sight of it made him shiver. Why would weapons be left down here? As he continued searching, Samuel's lantern beam struck something unusual. Against the far wall stood 3 wooden crates, stacked on top of each other. Unlike the others, these crates were still mostly intact, though covered in dust. His heart hammered as he dragged the top one down and pried it open. Inside, he found a collection of small jars sealed with wax. He picked one up and shook it gently. It felt heavy. And when he scraped away the dirt on the outside, he could see faint symbols etched into the glass. Whatever was inside had been meant to last. He opened the second crate and found more objects, metal tools, chains, and what looked like pieces of armor. The third crate, however, startled him most. It was filled with bones. They were small, at first glance too small for animals. His lantern shook in his hand as he realized what he was looking at. These were human remains, carefully placed inside the crate and sealed away. Samuel stumbled back, his breath quickening. The chamber suddenly felt colder, the air pressing down on him. Who were these people? Why were they buried in wooden boxes inside a hidden tunnel? He tried to calm himself, reminding his heart that he had chosen to discover these secrets. Forced himself to look again, and this time he noticed something else. Among the bones was a necklace, a simple cord with a pendant carved from stone. He picked it up, and the weight of it felt strange in his hand, almost as if it carried the memories of the person who had once worn it. He put the pendant in his pocket, deciding it was too important to leave behind, and stepped back toward the carvings on the wall. He raised the lantern higher, studying the figures. Slowly, a thought began to form in his mind. The drawings seemed to show people moving underground, carrying objects, and gathering in groups. Perhaps this tunnel had not only been a hiding place. Perhaps it had been a meeting point, the secret base where people lived or planned something long ago. The more he stared, the stronger his suspicion grew. This was no ordinary tunnel. It was part of a hidden network, maybe even built for protection. During a time of danger, the weapons, the coins, the carvings, they all hinted at a community that had survived here in silence. And the crates of bones, they suggested that not everyone had made it out. Samuel's lantern flickered suddenly, making his heart jump. He shook it, but the flame was dying. He realized he had spent too long down there. Reluctantly, he marked the chamber with chalk and began the long walk back. As he retraced his steps, his mind buzzed with questions. Who had built the tunnel? Why had they sealed people inside crates? And what had happened to them? When he finally climbed back out into the open air, the sunlight hit him like a blessing. He sat on the grass again, breathing deeply, the pendant still in his hand.
Ow.
This time, he knew he couldn't keep the secret to himself. The discovery was too big, too important. That evening, Samuel visited the local historian, an elderly man named Mr. Parker, who had spent his life collecting stories of the town. Samuel described the tunnel, the carvings, and the crates. First, Parker looked skeptical. But when Samuel placed the old coin and the stone pendant on the table, the old man's eyes widened. He touched the pendant with trembling fingers and whispered that he had seen similar objects in history books. Parker told Samuel that the land had once been part of a contested area centuries ago, a place where traders, soldiers, and settlers clashed. Rumors had always existed about hidden passages used by rebels or smugglers, but no one had ever found proof. Samuel's discovery could be that proof. The carvings, the relics, and especially the bones suggested the tunnel was not only real, but had been used for far more than trade. The old historian grew excited and insisted on visiting the farm. Together, the two men walked to the crack in the earth. Samuel's dog barked nervously at the entrance, refusing to come closer, but Parker was eager. He wanted to see it for himself. That night, Samuel could hardly sleep again. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rustling through the fields. For the first time, he realized that his quiet farm was no longer just a farm. It was a doorway into a lost world, one filled with secrets, tragedies, and mysteries no one had spoken of for generations. And somewhere deep inside, Samuel knew that what he had uncovered so far was only the beginning. The crates of bones were shocking enough to shake his soul. But something told him there was much more waiting for him further down in the tunnel. Samuel felt both fear and excitement when Mr. Parker, the old historian, asked to go down into the tunnel. For years, Parker had read dusty books about the land and listened to stories passed down by elders. But he had never touched anything as real as the objects Samuel placed in his hands. The coin, the pendant, the description of bones and crates. This was more than legend. It was proof. They agreed to explore the tunnel together the next day. Samuel prepared carefully, gathering lanterns, ropes, extra food, and water. He sharpened his old farming knife and slipped it into his belt, not because he expected trouble, but because the darkness below made him want to carry something protective. Mr. Parker arrived at the farm early, carrying notebooks, pencils, and a small camera. His hands shook with excitement as they stood at the crack in the earth, staring down at the rope that led into the hidden world. When they descended, Parker's breath caught in his throat at the sight of the smooth walls and carvings. He muttered to himself as he touched the stone, whispering names of ancient groups he had studied. His voice echoed strangely in the narrow tunnel, making Samuel feel as though unseen people were listening in the darkness. They walked slowly, passing the chamber of coins and pottery, and then the chamber with the crates. Parker stopped there, his face pale when Samuel showed him the bones. He bent low, studying them with careful hands. His voice trembled as he explained that these people had likely died in secrecy, hidden away from the world. He suspected they were not soldiers, but perhaps families seeking shelter. Samuel listened in silence, his eyes fixed on the carved figures on the walls. But Parker was not satisfied with just this chamber. He wanted to go deeper, beyond where Samuel had gone before. With lanterns held high, they pressed forward. Into parts of the tunnel Samuel had not dared to explore. The air grew colder and heavier as they walked. The tunnel sloped downward again, and the sound of their footsteps echoed like distant thunder. Their lights revealed more markings, clearer this time. Some were symbols repeated again and again, circles with lines through them. Parker scribbled furiously in his notebook, whispering that these might be signs of protection or warnings left by the builders. After nearly an hour of walking, they reached a point where the tunnel ended in a large stone wall. At first, it seemed to be a dead end, but Samuel noticed something unusual. The center of the wall looked smoother than the rest, as if it had been deliberately sealed. The edges of the stone carried faint scratches, like someone had once tried to open it but failed. Parker's eyes glimmered with excitement. "This isn't the end," he whispered. "It's a door." Samuel's stomach tightened. He had half hoped their journey would end here, that they could turn back with their discoveries and let the mystery rest. But Parker insisted they try. Together, they searched the stone carefully, running their fingers across its surface. At last, Samuel found a small gap along one edge, almost invisible, but enough to suggest the wall could move. They worked for what felt like hours, using Samuel's hammer and Parker's small chisel. Sweat ran down Samuel's face despite the cold air, and dust filled the tunnel. At last, with a groaning sound that echoed like thunder underground, part of the wall shifted. A narrow opening appeared, wide enough for a man to slip through. Lantern. Light spilled into the hidden chamber beyond, and what they saw froze them both in place. The chamber was larger than any they had found before, almost like a hall carved into the earth. The ceiling arched high above, supported by stone beams. Along the walls were rows of shelves carved directly into the rock, each holding objects wrapped in cloth or stored in clay jars. At the far end stood a stone altar, its surface covered with strange markings and the remains of melted candles, but what truly stunned them was what lay in the center of the room. On the floor rested a human skeleton, far larger than any they had seen before, its bones arranged carefully as though placed there with respect. The skull was tilted slightly upward, and around its neck hung a heavy pendant, similar to the one Samuel had found earlier, but larger and carved with more detail. Parker gasped, stumbling forward. This is incredible," he whispered, his voice breaking with awe. "This is not just a tunnel. This is a burial site, a secret place of memory. Whoever these people were, they wanted this to remain hidden forever." Samuel felt his throat tighten. He stepped closer to the skeleton. Shining his lantern on it, the pendant glimmered faintly, its surface etched with symbols he did not understand. Beside the bones lay objects: a rusted sword, a broken shield, and a small wooden box sealed shut. They opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were scrolls, rolled tightly and tied with string. The parchment was yellowed and fragile, but the writing was still visible. Parker's hand shook as he lifted one. His eyes filled with tears as he read the strange letters, whispering translations under his breath. "This is a record," he murmured. "A record of struggle, of survival. These people were hiding not just their lives, but their history." The weight of the discovery pressed down on Samuel. He had always thought of himself as just a farmer, a man who worked the soil and raised animals. But now, standing in that hidden chamber, he realized he had uncovered something far beyond his world. This was not just about him or his land. This was about an entire chapter of human history buried in silence. Suddenly, a sound broke through the silence. A low rumble, like the earth groaning. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the chamber trembled. Samuel grabbed Parker's arm, pulling him back toward the entrance. The old man clutched the scrolls tightly, refusing to leave them behind. They stumbled through the narrow opening as the wall behind them cracked, pieces of stone falling to the ground. The tunnel shook violently, reminding Samuel of the earthquake that had first revealed this place. His lantern swung wildly, shadows leaping across the walls. His heart pounded as he dragged Parker forward, desperate to reach the rope before the tunnel collapsed. The rumbling grew louder, then slowly faded, leaving only silence again. They stopped, gasping for breath, their faces covered in dust. Samuel's hands shook as he tightened his grip on the lantern. Parker looked pale, but his eyes burned with determination. "We cannot keep this hidden," he said, clutching the scrolls to his chest. "The world must know what lies beneath your land." Samuel didn't answer. His mind was torn. Part of him wanted to protect the secret, to keep the tunnel safe from greedy hands and careless strangers, but another part of him knew Parker was right. The discovery was too important. It belonged to history, not just to him. When they finally climbed back to the surface, the night sky stretched wide above them. The stars shimmered as if they too knew the secret now revealed. Parker turned to Samuel, his face glowing in the lantern light. "This changes everything," he said softly. Samuel stood quietly, staring at the crack in the earth. He felt the weight of the pendant still in his pocket, its surface warm against his hand. He knew they had uncovered something that would shock not only their small community, but perhaps the entire region. The tunnel was no longer just a mystery to him. It was a doorway into a forgotten world, and what they had found inside would change lives forever. After the terrifying but incredible discovery in the hidden chamber, Samuel and Mr. Parker spent the next few days carefully documenting everything. They did not want to disturb the tunnel too much, knowing that it was fragile and centuries old. The crates, the skeleton, the scrolls, and the artifacts were all carefully photographed, sketched, and recorded in notes. Every object told a story, and Samuel felt as if he was holding pieces of people's lives in his hands. The experience had changed him. He was no longer just a farmer. He was the keeper of a secret that had been buried for hundreds of years. Traveled slowly at first, Samuel told a few close friends, and word eventually reached the local authorities. Archaeologists and historians soon arrived, eager to examine the site. They came with tools, scanners, and notebooks, ready to carefully explore the tunnel while preserving its integrity. Samuel showed them the entrance, the rope, and the path he and Parker had taken. The experts were amazed that a tunnel of this size and complexity had remained hidden for so long. The community that had once laughed at Samuel now watched in awe. People came from nearby towns to see the crack in the earth, though the authorities kept them at a safe distance. Samuel's farm became a place of curiosity, and he felt both proud and nervous. The tunnel had brought fame, but it also brought questions, responsibilities, and attention he had never wanted. Inside the tunnel, the experts worked slowly and carefully. They uncovered more chambers that Samuel had not yet explored, each one filled with objects, carvings, and artifacts. Some rooms contained more human remains, each treated with care and respect. Archaeologists explained that the people who had built the tunnel were likely fleeing conflict, storing valuable items, and attempting to preserve their lives and culture. The scrolls, the coins, the symbols on the walls were proof of a sophisticated group that had lived secretly underground for safety. One day, while Samuel watched the experts work, Parker pointed out something remarkable. A section of the wall had markings that, when studied carefully, appeared to be a map of the surrounding area. The map seemed to show hidden paths and other tunnels that might exist nearby. Samuel's heart raced. Perhaps the tunnel was not the only one. Perhaps there were more secrets waiting to be discovered. Samuel felt a mixture of pride and fear. He had found something extraordinary, but he also realized how delicate it all was. One wrong step, one careless person could destroy centuries of hidden history. He stayed close to the site, helping the experts as they documented the artifacts, and taking care not to disturb anything unnecessarily. Every time he descended the rope into the tunnel, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. The story of the tunnel spread beyond the small town. Porters arrived, cameras flashing, microphones held toward Samuel and Parker. They asked questions about how the tunnel had been found, what was inside, and what it meant. Samuel answered carefully, sharing the facts without exaggeration. He wanted people to understand the importance of the discovery, not just the excitement. Of a hidden place, the artifacts were carefully transported to local museums for preservation. Archaeologists analyzed the coins, pottery, and tools. Discovering connections to groups that had lived in the region centuries ago, Parker translated some of the scrolls, revealing records of daily life, trade, and even struggles against invaders. The story of the people who had built the tunnel began to emerge, a tale of survival, secrecy, and resilience. Samuel often returned to the entrance of the tunnel at night. Standing there, he felt a strange connection to the past. The earth beneath him had held secrets for centuries, and now, because of him, the world could know. He thought of the people who had carved the walls, buried their treasures, and left messages for those who might come later. Their lives, hidden for so long, were finally remembered. The discovery also brought personal change. Samuel became known, not just as a farmer, but as a guardian of history. People respected him, and he felt a deep sense of purpose. He spent more time studying the artifacts, learning from the experts, and understanding the lives of the people who had hidden underground. The tunnel had opened a new chapter in his life, one full of curiosity, responsibility, and wonder. Despite the attention and fame, Samuel remained humble. He never allowed greed or pride to take over. He insisted that the tunnel be preserved and protected, ensuring that the history it held would not be lost. He worked with local authorities and historians to secure the site, placing signs and barriers to prevent accidents. He knew that, while the discovery was extraordinary, it was fragile and must be treated with care. As the weeks passed, the town itself began to change. People visited museums to see the artifacts. Schools used the story to teach history, and local guides started giving tours to explain the significance of the tunnel. Samuel's farm became a symbol of discovery and knowledge, a place where ordinary life had revealed something extraordinary. One evening, Samuel returned to the tunnel alone. The sun was setting, painting the fields with gold and red light. Stood at the edge, looking down into the darkness. The cool air rose from the crack, carrying the smell of earth and history. He thought about the lives that had been hidden below, the struggles and hopes of people long gone. He touched the rope gently, feeling a deep respect for the world beneath him. He realized that the tunnel was more than just a physical space. It was a connection between generations, a reminder that history is alive and that ordinary people can uncover extraordinary truths. Samuel understood that he had been chosen, in a way, to bring this secret to light. The earthquake that had opened the tunnel had changed his life forever, revealing not just a hidden passage, but the story of courage, survival, and the human spirit. Samuel looked out over his fields, the sun dipping below the horizon. The farm was quiet, but he felt the presence of the past beneath his feet. He smiled softly, knowing that the discovery had given him a new purpose. The tunnel, once hidden and forgotten, was now remembered and respected. And Samuel, the simple farmer who had followed curiosity into darkness, had become a bridge between the past and the present, ensuring that the people who had lived, struggled, and died beneath the earth would never be forgotten. As night fell, Samuel left the entrance for the last time that evening. He walked slowly across his fields, the stars twinkling above. Somewhere below, the tunnel still held secrets, waiting quietly. But now, thanks to him, the story of those who had built it and lived in it would live on forever. And Samuel knew that the earth, with its hidden wonders, still had the power to surprise and change lives, even in the quietest corners of a simple farm.